What?
Just wanted to leave an impact.
Yeah.
Her legacy.
Yeah, for her legacy.
For your legacy.
Oh, for my legacy. Can we talk about my legacy now?
Edit this for you.
No, that's okay.
You don't want this in there?
Okay. Marshall Moore, currently Utah Film Studios, former director of the Utah Film Commission, 2007 through 2014.
Virginia Pearce, current director, Utah Film Commission, 2014 to present day.
Sure. So I started at the Utah Film Commission as a producer services executive.
What
back
year was that?
2003.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I was working in the industry as a location manager.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been approached, actually, a previous time to come join the staff, and I turned it down.
Uh-huh.
And I had transitioned from Touched by an Angel as the location manager to Everwood, and I was in my first season there when Lee Von Der Esch came calling again and said, would you like to join the staff of the Utah Film Commission? And I thought to myself, if I turn it down a second time,
they're not going to ask you.
they're not going to ask me again. And it was a time, I'd done episodic television for eight seasons, and I'd been a location manager for 20 years, and I figured it was time to do something maybe a little different. So in 2003, I joined the staff of the Film Commission, and what the difference was then as to where it is now, I was brought in for a specific reason. That was to take my location manager skills and apply them to, bringing production to the state. And, because the incentive program was just in its infancy. As a matter of fact, I hadn't even heard of it until I joined the staff.
Yeah.
So it was more about client services and location scouting and making productions feel comfortable that they could find what they're looking for in Utah.
Well, yeah, I think there's definitely been, since 2003, for sure, there's been these waves of film production. And it's tied a lot to the incentive, for sure. Pre-incentive, things were so big here, and then everyone else started offering incentives, and so things kind of dropped off. And then as our incentive program has grown little by little, I think we've seen the growth follow that.
Oh, yeah. I had heard of Canada offering incentives and runaway production and all that. But when I first got to the office, it was like, hey, we need to start researching how we're going to get more production here through this trial program called a rebate. And I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds good. Yeah. But I kept doing what I was doing as the people above me worked on trying to figure out how this would work into what currently existed, and that was through GoEd. At the time, it was a pilot program.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Me first?
Sure.
I think it's really a sales job. I think it ends up being. I feel like I am selling Utah to film productions. I am selling the idea of the film industry to the government. I'm selling and to the community. So I'm always thinking of new ways to tell the story about why film production is great for Utah and why Utah is great for film production on the other side. Obviously, a strength for me, I feel like, is the fact that I am from Utah. I left for a long time, and then I came back because of wanting to have a home base here and loving all of the things that Utah has to offer. So I think I can tell that story with some authenticity. Weaknesses, do I have to have weakness? I don't know if I have weakness.
Look, I think one of your strengths is definitely getting out there in front of everything and creating a great awareness for the state of Utah and what we offer through our crews, through our locations, through the services that we provide and the infrastructure that's already here. I think you do a really good job at that. And I've noticed that Michelle and I were talking this morning about how you do a great job networking. With everybody outside the state, inside the state, and that's one of the things we really enjoyed watching you do and grow and develop over the last few years.
As I said, I'm a talker, so
that helps.
Maybe I think actually I would say my weaknesses, and because we come from kind of two different sides of film, I don't have a production background, and I think at the beginning that made people nervous, like. How are you going to talk about film production if you don't know film production? But I think it's I rely on my staff, obviously, a huge amount, because they all have film production background, so they can talk that. And then I've learned a ton. It's actually, I think, been an asset for me to go in and really understand, what do you do? And what does that take? And where did you come from? And how does this work? And I've learned on the job a ton, and I come from it more of a holistic kind of marketing background that I think has been a different side of things.
Well, I have to be honest, I felt very comfortable and relieved when you got the job, and I knew what your background was, because I didn't bring those skills to the job. I brought a different set of skills, and times were changing. And I felt a little overwhelmed at the time to be able to accomplish and fulfill those certain missions, especially the marketing aspects and social media and all that. I was more based in, as you know, production and making sure I was getting the crews working and getting the right types of productions in here and paying attention to that and relying, on other staff members to navigate me through the marketing elements, which I had no background in before, except a little PR I had to do as a location manager, which came up. So I was really happy when you came on and brought that completely different dynamic to the office that I wasn't able to bring. So I would say that was one of my weaknesses for sure, was in marketing and publicity. When I was the director of the Film Commission, even before that, I think one of the things that I brought to it was a sense that I wanted to help the industry grow from inside out. I got hit up a lot, like, why are we so concerned bringing productions from the outside and not nurturing our local crew? Well, you have to do both. You have to have that balance.
So important.
And I love what you said in your earlier interview about, you have to have the big productions, but you also have the little ones to train the people to work on the big productions as part of the process. About 2 years into the job at the Film Commission, I realized our local industry was dying. There was hardly any local production originating from here, and if it was, some of them were actually leaving the state. So one of the greatest things that I think I was able to be involved with and move forward was kind of that local, low-budget film incentive. Basically, a group of local filmmakers came to me and said, hey, we're being overlooked. We don't have $1 million. Can you help us? And so we spent a number of months, and it ended up being a little over a year before we got an incentive approved, just to stimulate the local film industry, things that started here and ended here. And it's still going today. So that's one of the things that I'm most proud of about people like Michael Flynn, David Hunter, Craig Clyde. Were all people that approached me and said, and Adam Abel, Ryan Little,
don't forget about us.
Don't forget about us. We appreciate you going after those big studio movies and TV shows, which is great for the economy, but don't forget to build your own industry here in the state.
So. And that's a big part. I love that too. And even though we've changed and fluctuated kind of the way the incentive works, we've kept that ability for the community to have access to that funds, and we hold back a certain amount to make sure that we have funds throughout the year, even if we have bigger productions that come on top.
Yeah, and I've only seen it get better. Like since you've been there, I've seen a nice balance. And I know you've had to be creative in the office, the way you structure things, but all within the scope of what's allowed by the legislation to do. Well, for me, I got to go back a little bit to answer this question. You okay with that?
Yeah.
So when I first pitched myself to work here at the studio, it was as a consultant. And I thought I could take some of the skills that I had working at the Film Commission, those relationships, to promote the studio, which was not completed yet. It wasn't finished. But I went to the owners at that time, there was two, and I said, who's going to use this building that you're buying now? I don't know. We don't know yet. We haven't thought that far. And I said, well, I can help with that. And so what I did is I took all those relationships and started building, relationships around the studio as part of the infrastructure of the entire state of Utah. But instead of me worrying about all the crew and the locations all over the state, I had to worry about this. And that ultimately led to the first show, which you mentioned earlier, Blood and Oil, on one of those week-long location tours that we did, or meeting tours that we did back then. So the way I see things moving in the future, having this here, expanding this possibly, I know that there are plans to expand, maybe build a few smaller stages, which would be helpful for independents, commercials, music videos, and still be able to do big TV series like Yellowstone, like Blood and Oil, and accommodate the independent features too. That's what we really want to do here. We want to have a variety of projects, and we've done 36 projects since the
Wow.
studio opened. Commercials,
Great.
music videos, corporate events.
Yeah.
Bands have played
Yeah.
here. So, and of course, there's our standard movies and
Yeah.
TV shows. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're on such a roll right now in the last couple of years with just bigger productions and more production coming in. And, we've definitely capped out with our incentive. And so that is we're gonna have to think about what growth looks like for that. But I think overall, I'd love to see us, continue to build our relationship and our reputation in the film industry so that Utah becomes kind of a go-to in the same breath of New Mexico and Georgia and Louisiana and Canada. Utah's also in the mix because of the, amazing natural assets we already have.
So, are we in that breath right now, or are we just outside that breath?
I feel like we're already in that breath in a lot of conversations because I'll get people calling and saying, okay, I'm either going to take this to Canada, Vancouver, or shoot it in Utah, or we're looking at New Mexico and Utah. We're looking at, mostly it's those two because I think it's the western half. It also is a similar look, either the mountains or the desert. But I feel like I'm proud of the fact that we're already in that conversation, given that our incentive program is so vastly different than those two powerhouses. And I think with the right kind of growth strategy, we could just really, the sky's the limit.
So, when you're having those conversations, what is the factors that are determining whether they choose somewhere else or they actually end up here?
We sell, along with the standard, locations and crew and support services, we also talk a lot about it's a new look. People are getting tired of being based in Albuquerque. They're tired of Louisiana. Vancouver's so busy that you often end up bringing in crew from outside the country anyway. You also have a Made in USA production. We use all of those arguments to talk about the benefits of shooting in Utah. And I think that does win people over. We've had people say, well, we could take this to South Africa and, get 40% back. I'm like, but then you're in South Africa. Like, wouldn't you rather be in Salt Lake City and be able to fly home for the night?
Oh, yeah. And I listen to these stories once they come back from these things. Oh, and the shipping and the airfare
it's
and
terrible.
the travel and the delays and
Yeah.
all that. And I'm like, oh, if it
Yeah,
and
you're saving
90-minute
yourself.
flight, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So. Yeah, so Yellowstone is definitely the biggest production that we've had in terms of its scope, its visibility, its star power, its economic impact. Really, it's been so fun to have it here and to help see it, to nurture it, and to help grow it, and to grow the industry along with it. Because I think it's always a learning curve when new productions come into town. Paramount's obviously a new network. They're trying to figure out how they work. They haven't worked here before. We had a mix of people that had worked in Utah and had not. And so it's always, trying to help them navigate and for us to navigate their system. And I think I'm hopeful that it will continue for another season so that we can just capitalize on what we've learned.
Sure. And, having a purpose-built studio like this, the purpose of building this studio was to accommodate shows like Yellowstone and Blood and Oil. Doesn't mean we don't do many other things like independent film, and that's great. But I like to say the studio fulfills the measure of its creation when a show like Yellowstone is here.
Yeah.
Because they're wall to wall. They're all three stages. They're the mill and the shop and the parking and all the offices are all being used to create one show. And that, I think, was the vision initially when this was built, was to accommodate TV series and have long-term stability in the industry, which TV series, Yellowstone's been in the building for over a year now.
Yeah. And created, 400 something jobs?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a lot. And they're long-term jobs and they're high-paying jobs. And I think all of that really helps tell our story about why film production in Utah.
Yeah, and why a studio is necessary for some of these productions. Not everyone, not every production needs a studio, but when they do, it's here.
Yeah.
And it serves as a platform for other things to happen. Because once they settle here, then you're getting locations used in Heber and Oakley and Park City and Camas and some of those rural areas too, because we're just that much closer outside of Salt Lake to be able to, for the location people to find locations that work in the context of the show,
Mhm.
which are more unique than what you would find in and around Salt Lake, which is a
Mhm.
completely different look. And
Yeah,
you still have to travel up here, but now you're 25 minutes closer
right.
to some of those locations. So for a show like Yellowstone, it's important to have that as an option in and around. And as much as time as they spent here a year, they filmed more location days outside of the studio than they did in the studio,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah.
great for the state
It is
and
great.
still works for us because they're here year round.
Yeah.
As film commissioner for 7 years, I was the director, worked there for a total of 10. The thing I'm most fond of is relationships
Mhm.
with the people within our own industry in the state and nurturing their growth and success. Nothing made me more happy or proud than seeing a filmmaker come to me in the infant stages of, I want to make a movie,
Mhm.
to going through whether it was the incentive process, if they had that, or finding their locations, assembling their cast,
Mhm.
getting the money together, and getting it up on the screen. To me,
Mhm.
that was it's a huge accomplishment for them, but for me, that's what I liked seeing the most, is the success of people I knew and worked side by side with, having continued success and getting their projects made. So being able to work with our local film community, like I said, to build the industry from the inside out during my time there was at the top of my list. I will say, though, I had to chase those big shows too,
Right.
because to make the program successful in the eyes of our legislators, in the eyes of GOED, who's our parent organization, there had to be that element in the mix of it too. It couldn't just be the local film industry making small movies. There
Mhm.
had to be visibility for the state that was worldwide. And during my tenure there, we did High School Musical, High School Musical 2, and High School Musical 3. And, we can kind of laugh and smile about that now, but we know the impact that had, not only with our local legislators and even our governor at the time,
Mhm.
but worldwide and internationally.
Yeah.
You can reference that movie anytime, anywhere now, and people either laugh and chuckle,
Mhm.
but they know it,
Yeah.
and that's one thing. And then, of course, working with Disney on a number of tentpole features like Lone Ranger and John Carter, although they weren't successful and didn't carry on, they certainly gave us notoriety
Oh, yeah.
and visibility, along with 127 hours. So those are some of the projects that were there that I'm proud of, that I was glad we were able to get to the state. And the incentive program was vital to that, and so was our local crew and cast in making all those happen. So I would say that that's probably something that I look back on and feel good about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, I love that part of it too, and just the community aspect and getting new people to know about the Film Commission who maybe didn't ever know that it was a resource for them too. Especially the smaller, just out of college, kind of trying to make their way in the film world. And I also am really proud of just the Sundance connection and being able to pull in some of those independent filmmakers and make sure that they knew what we had to offer. And I look at, Hereditary and Wind River and Brigsby Bear, and there's been just some new classic films that all have Utah. And I love when people say, "What? That was shot in Utah? I had no idea." And
Yeah.
you're like, "Yeah, I know."
That's kind of a
great."
thing.
Yeah.
Unless you educate, and it's a continual
Yeah.
education process,
Yeah.
isn't it? I mean, you make the film in Utah brochure, you publish it on the
Yeah.
website, but unless people take the time to
Mhm.
really put two and two together, they're just
Yeah.
like, they don't know where it
Well,
is.
and that's such a fun story to tell. And I think there's so much more that we can do with film tourism, and that's definitely something that I'm going to focus on in the next year.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in film tourism
Yeah.
because people want to go to the places where these movies are filmed. I'm no exception.
Yeah.
I go down to
yeah.
Monument Valley. I want to run where Forrest ran.
Yeah.
That's a big deal to me. And people come into town, they want to see Sharpay's Locker at East High
Yeah.
School. That's still there.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation about that today.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
funny.
So I mean, yeah,
So
that
good.
it's still there. So
Definitely. When I leave the Film Commission, I want to look back and just see that there has been some exponential growth and that I had an impact on, this both the state and I think a part of that is just the state being proud of film production that happens in their own backyard, and being able to point to the films that they saw in their infancy and see on the screen, and that all of our government leaders know the impact of film production in the economy is really being able to know that I had influence on their belief that it's a strong part of our creative economy.
Like I said, relationships, I think, were the biggest thing for me. My legacy, some of the things, unfortunately, that I remember, I got a lot of hate mail when I was the director of the Film Commission. From time to time. I mean, I don't know if you've ever experienced that,
From crews
random.
and just random.
Yeah, and that I used it as motivation, but I got some, anonymous letters in the mail that said, you should be doing this and not this, and what do you're not representing as well, and all those kind of things. And it turns out that those came from people I knew. They were personal friends of mine. So that was really a difficult time, and it stuck with me for a number of years, because this came maybe halfway through. But one of the things that I always tried to do was represent my love for Utah film, for the locations we have here, for the crews that I grew up working with side by side with, and letting them always know that I heard them, letting them always know that I cared about their lives, letting them always know that I knew the work we were doing at the state office trickled down to, whether they're able to make the mortgage payment or a car payment. And those things were always on my mind. And sometimes it was good times, and other times it was not good times. And you have to ride them both. And how much do you take on yourself? Is this all my responsibility that the industry is struggling, or is there other external factors?
And you know what I would say to you? That's their baggage.
Yeah.
Let that go.
You see I'm still carrying it a little bit. So I was not involved in the making of The Sandlot in any way. I love that movie. It is my go-to. Like you mentioned, your go-to is Thelma and Louise. My go-to is the Sandlot. Very, very proud of that movie that was filmed in Utah, but I had nothing to do with it. But in 2013, when I was the director of the Film Commission, I helped organize the 20th anniversary. I did get a little grief for that. They said, you put a little too much time into this anniversary thing. But on the other hand, I thought, aren't we supposed to recognize Utah-made films? It was an anniversary. It did use local crew. And it's you can find The Sandlot in almost any top 10 baseball movie list now. And the major leaguers love it. They all grew up watching that movie, the current major leaguers. So one of the things that outside of maybe the economic development part and the job creation part, was putting together that event was probably the highlight of working at the Film Commission, being able to take the movie that was filmed here and show it at the location where it was actually filmed, and put 2,000 people there to watch it and experience it, and bring the cast back to meet their fans, and the fans to meet them, and the people of the neighborhood crying, and reliving those memories of when they actually filmed there, above and beyond the day-to-day tasks of politics and working.
Right.
That has a warm feeling for me. As the Film Commissioner, I was able to walk away a year later having accomplished that, and that felt really good.
That's great.